Cimber seized Caesar's toga, to which Caesar exclaimed, "Why? This is violence." And then Casca striking the first blow to Caesar's neck. Longinus, Caesar's face, stabbed in his back, his thigh. Caesar tripped, fell on the stairs. He was stabbed 23 times, and he was 55 years old when he died. So, today we're going to talk about the Roman Republic. We're still in chapter 11, and I've really spent more time on chapter 11 than I intended. My intention for today was to finish the Roman Republic, cover it pretty quick, and jump into the empire and maybe try to get it done. I said, that's just too much. And I didn't have that many slides for the Roman Republic. I thought, well, I'm just going to take it easy this week. We'll leave early. Everybody's okay with that, right? Yeah. You're ready to leave right now. I can see the faces. And then I started adding to it. So the Roman Republic might be in kind of a long lesson after all, so we'll see. Anyway, let's get started. All right. I asked Perplexity AI, who are the most important people of the Roman Republic? Okay, now there's a billion of them, right? The Republic lasted from way BC through, well, from the end of the monarchy, all the way through the empire when it began with Octavian in 27 BC. So there's a bunch of people. So I asked, who are the most important? And Perplexity came up with 15. I asked Grok the same thing. It came up with 17. And Gemini listed 14. Gemini is the only one who listed Mark Antony as one of the most important leaders of the Roman Republic. In my book, I list 6, and let me tell you why. Of these that I pulled up from Perplexity, the first couple are beyond our period. They were early Republic before the intertestament period even began. Okay, so we're not interested in those at all. Okay, the next 3 were within the intertestament period, but they're really not within our intertestament period. Pompey conquered Jerusalem and Judea in 63 BC. So really Rome itself, the Roman Republic, really is not in my period of interest in the book until 63 BC. So we're not going to put anybody in there that's before 63 BC. The overlap are the guys who are in bold here. Marius, Sulla, Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar, and then I add one more in my book, Mark Antony. Mark Antony was not that important of a figure in the Roman Republic, but he was important in that he was a failure. I think my life, I'm going to be important because I was a failure, so I don't want to be, but it might be, I don't know. But Mark Antony was important because he was a failure, okay? He was, because of his turning against Rome and going in with Cleopatra, okay, he basically ushered in the rise of the Roman Principate, or the Roman Empire. We'll talk about what the difference is between the empire and the Principate and the dominant in just a minute, okay? So hang on for that, okay? So these are the 5 that overlap. The other is a Cicero. He was an orator, statesman. We don't care about him. Well, we care about him. He's a good guy, I'm sure, but historically he didn't do that much. Brutus, Longinus, they were the co-conspirators for Julius Caesar's murder, so they're important historically, but not that much to talk about. And then some other notable leaders that really don't overlap with our history at all. So that's how I came up with and this is before AI, this is before I could ask anybody any questions. I had to come up with, okay, who do I think are the most important leaders of the Republic? Those are the 6 I came up with. Again, Marius, Sulla, Pompey, Crassus, Julius Caesar, and Mark Antony. All right, so those are my 6. So we'll talk about those 6. Gaius Marius. These 2 first people, Marius and Sulla, are very important because of what they did set the basis, set the tone, even though they were a generation before, they set the tone of how the Republic was to transform into the empire. They did things that set precedent for Julius Caesar. They did things that set precedent for Octavian, who became the first emperor, okay, Marius and Sulla. So let's talk about them. Marius earned the title third founder of Rome because of his military successes. He was first elected, not first, but at some point elected as tribune to the plebes. We talked about how powerful that was as an office. It was a plebeian office. Okay, they were the lower rung of the social ladder. So it was a very powerful office of the plebes. They could overturn decisions of the Senate, those kinds of things. He served as consul more than anybody else in Rome, 7 times. He was very prolific with proscriptions when he and Sulla were at each other's throat. They were the first civil war of Rome, the first major civil war of the Republic, Sulla and Marius, and they used proscription greatly. We talked about that last week, what proscription was, right? You kill your enemies, anybody has to do with your enemies, okay? And then they disappear in the middle of the night, or they put their head on a spike or whatever. So He, Marius, married Julia, who was the aunt of Julius Caesar. This caused problems for Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was almost proscripted because of his relationship with Marius. Because Marius was an enemy of Sulla. We'll talk about Sulla in just a minute, okay? So Julius Caesar almost lost his life because of this relationship. It is believed that Marius made significant reforms of the military during his rule in the 100s BC, 90s, 80s BC, in that time frame, okay? One of the most significant, we're going to talk a lot about this in chapter 15, if we ever get there. But one of the most significant things he did was he kind of transformed the military into letting non-land-owning Romans to be in the military, and giving them the possibility of owning land in the military once they finished their military service. What this did was it put the decision of who was going to own land, like if I had a legion of men, I had 6,000 men under my command, I would make the decision how well these men fought, you know, what they did as in their military service. And if this particular guy did really well, I might give him a bunch of land after he's finished with the service, right? This caused the legions, this caused the military of Rome, the mighty military of Rome, to start shifting their allegiance from the Senate under the Republic to the individual leaders of the military. Julius Caesar commanded a bunch of legions. Octavian commanded a bunch of legions. Pompey commanded a bunch of legions. Sulla, Marius, these guys, okay, we start seeing the transformation of how the legions shifted their loyalty to the commanders from the Senate. What I'm trying to set up for you, the whole lesson today is what I'm setting up for you is this transformation from the Republic to the Empire. If we have time, we're going to talk about the Empire of Star Wars. And we'll talk about the really, really interesting correlations between Star Wars and Rome. Okay, we won't spend much time on it, but toward the end of the lesson we will. This caused soldiers to begin declaring allegiance to the legion commander instead of the Senate. Marius did not really take advantage of this, but we'll see later on that Julius Caesar did, Sulla and Octavian. Sulla, a bitter enemy of Marius. He served as consul twice. He was an aristocratic general with the Optimates, okay, the senatorial elite, okay, as compared to Marius, who was a celebrated general and champion of the people. Who do we see the comparison to? Julius Caesar. He was all in for the populace of the people, right? And the Senate killed him. The Optimates killed him. The elite of Rome killed him. They assassinated him on the Ides of March 44 BC. Popular with the people, aristocrats. Conflict. The conflict set up right here between Sulla and Marius. Okay? He was the first dictator to have control of Rome for more than 6 months. Precedent, once again. No one up to that time had been in control of Rome for more than 6 months as a dictator. Okay? But Sulla set the precedence. Who would become dictator for more than 6 months? Julius Caesar. Over and over and over and over again. At one time, he became dictator for 10 years. They were 10 one-year terms, but they were 10 years. And then he became dictator for life 1 month before he was killed. Oh, life didn't last too long for dictators, I guess, when you became dictator for life. All right. Sulla, surprisingly, died of natural causes in 78 BC. Now, the legacy of Marius and Sulla, they ruled a generation before Caesar, Pompey, and Octavian, but they became the mold into which these men would be cast later at the end of the Republican into the beginning of the Empire. All right. Now, the conflict between Sulla and Marius. It was Rome's first full-scale civil war, as I mentioned. Early on in their careers, this kind of was the beginning of things. When Sulla was a subservient to Marius, they disagreed about who should get the credit for a particular military victory they had. Okay, so it started the conflict between them. A significant rift developed between them when there was a dispute over who should command Roman forces against Mithridates VI of Pontus. Okay, now back then, to be the Roman military commander of a campaign against somebody was a big deal. I mean, if you wanted to get somewhere in Rome, you commanded a military campaign against somebody. Okay, that was a big deal. If you were successful, it was good. You come back and have a Roman triumph. You could drag your prisoners through the street, and the Romans go, "Yay, Marius! Yay, Sulla!" Whatever. If you were unsuccessful, well, we won't talk about that. Didn't work out so good for them, maybe. But if you were successful, it was a big deal. Okay, so this conflict arose between Sulla and Marius. The Senate initially gave Sulla the command, but Marius used political maneuvering to have the decision overturned in his favor. Okay, well, Sulla was not too pleased with that. He turned his car around, Like I tell my kids when they were growing up, we'll turn this car around, we'll go home. I don't think I ever did. But anyway, he turned his car around, he marched back on Rome to reclaim his command, forcing Marius to flee. Okay? This was the first time a Roman general marched on Rome. Who else did it? Julius Caesar. He crossed the Rubicon River. He said, the die is cast. And Julius Caesar marched on Rome, 40 years later. Interesting. We're seeing precedent build. We're seeing stuff happen that will become the transition from the Republic to the Empire. Okay? While Sulla campaigned in Pontus, Marius, back home, he seized the government. And he purged a bunch of Sulla's supporters. Then they became bitter enemies, like Caesar and Pompey, a little bit later on in history, toward the end of the Republic. Once again, precedent is being set with Sulla and Marius. That's why they're in my top list of important Roman Republican leaders. Okay? They became bitter enemies, and Marius died soon after this, but they didn't keep Sulla from coming back, and boy, setting off a series of proscriptions that was just unbelievable. A civil war that was just unbelievable. Sulla captured Rome and began proscriptions. He was appointed to be a dictator. He was the first one appointed to be a dictator for more than 6 months. He didn't do much more than 6 months. He resigned less than a year later, but it set precedents for what was to come later under Julius Caesar. So the conflict between Sulla and Marius marked the end of the Republic's traditional checks and balances and permanently destabilized the Republic's form of government. And then we see, of course, the empire come along. So let's look on. Now, before we go further, we've talked about two of my six most important people. I'm actually adding 7. I'm putting Octavian in there. And we're going to kind of use him as a dividing line between the Republic and the Empire, like we did Simon. Maccabees, remember back in those days? We had a dividing line between the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans. Some of you are nodding. You're just trying to humor me, aren't you? All right. So first of all, before we talk about the other 4 or 5, let's talk about triumvirate. Okay? The 2 threes. Triumvirate means 3 men. 3, men. Okay, 3 men. There were 2 sets of 3 men. The first triumvirate was in 60 BC. It was between Crassus, we just talked about him, Pompey we're going to talk about, and Julius Caesar we're going to talk about. The second triumvirate came later on in the Republic with Mark Antony, Lepidus, and Octavian. Okay, we'll talk about the details of that, but I wanted you to see kind of the setup for what the triumvirates were. All right, let's talk about Crassus. He served as consul twice in 70 and 55 BC. He was the richest man in Roman history. He gained his riches in not so savory ways. He would kill people. He had a whole bunch of slaves. If he doesn't like somebody, he would just go out and kill them, whatever, and seize their property. If somebody's house is burning down, he'd run up to them and say, hey, you want me to save your house? And they say, yeah, well, okay, I'll buy it for $5. And I'll use my army of slaves to put out the fire. And, oh, you don't want me to buy it? Okay, well, let's go home then. Come on, slaves, let's go home. And the house would just burn down to the ground. Okay, they didn't have, he was the fire department. And he used it to his advantage. He became the richest man in Rome. He owned huge parcels of land. He became the biggest slumlord the world had ever seen. He ended up leading an army against a guy named Spartacus. Everybody's heard of Spartacus, right? The slave / gladiator turned rebel of Rome. Okay? Crassus was the guy who was tasked by the Senate to go out and kill and capture Spartacus, this slave gladiator rebellion. Okay? So he led an army of 8 leaders to defeat this guy, and he agreed to even arm this or finance this army with his own money. He was very, very emphatic about his men being very loyal to him. Very early on, he practiced the art of decimation. Anybody ever heard of decimation? The practice of, you know what? I want to make sure y'all are loyal to me. Let me show you what I'm going to do if you're not. Line up in a row, all 6,000, 12,000 of you, how many there are. Every 10th one of you step out of line. And he'd go through and have somebody kill him, every 10th one. Decimation, that's where our word comes from. If something is decimated, that word comes from the Roman military, the act of decimation, when every 10th soldier was killed. That would set up pretty big loyalty to someone, right? To a commander, if you felt like you were going to be decimated later on. They became more afraid of Sulla than they did their enemies. Now, decimation only goes so far. You can only do that so many times, right? It is asymptotic. If you're mathematical, it's asymptotic. You know, you can't all the way get there because you're going to run out of men at some point. So you start out with 100, you go to 90, then you go to, 81, and then 72, and then depending on how you round off. So anyway, so decimation was his practice. So Crassus had Spartacus trapped in the southern part of Italy, and Pompey ended up wrapping up an engagement in Spain as orders south by the Senate to help Crassus. So Pompey came in with his legions and kind of helped clean up the remains of Spartacus's men, who were basically scattered all around southern Italy. And Pompey wrote a letter to the Senate and said, "We got Spartacus under control." He took credit for a lot of the work that Crassus had done, and the Senate gave Pompey credit for that. That did not set things well between Crassus and Pompey. They became enemies. Okay? The end of the revolt, 6,000 of Spartacus's men were crucified along the Appian Way from Rome to Capua, about 100 miles. I calculated that out. That's about one man every 88 feet. Not only was the practice of decimation very effective for keeping people in line, the act of crucifixion was also. The Romans said, if you're going to revolt against Rome, it's okay. We got more crosses. We probably even still have crosses along the Appian Way, and we'll just crucify you. And that was a good deterrent for people to really stay in line, wasn't it? Crassus later formed part of the first triumvirate with Julius Caesar and Pompey. As I mentioned, he and Pompey did not get along, but Julius Caesar held the triumvirate together. Julius Caesar was I didn't know him personally. I mean, I knew people who knew him, but I didn't know him personally. But he had a very strong personality. He was able to hold things together, even though these enemies between Crassus and Pompey. Crassus died in 53 BC in an ill-fated attempt against the Parthians. It said that they poured molten gold down his throat. And I'm not sure if that was while he was alive or if it was after he died or if that's just a story. I don't know, but it seems like an expensive way to kill somebody, I guess. And this happened during a peace meeting with the Parthians. All right. Pompey. He served as consul 3 times, subdued Judah in 63 BC. Remember him? We had a fight between Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II, the two Hasmoneans. Remember this, right? Somebody nods. Okay, good. Humoring me once again. That's good. Keep humoring me. So he came in and settled the dispute between Hyrcanus II, Aristobulus II, okay, and he took over the region in 63 BC. So that's a main thing about Pompey as far as our history is concerned, okay? As I mentioned, he took most of the credit for the suppression of the slave revolt in 71 BC. And he became consul at a very early age, 35 years old, even though the cursus honorum dictated that you really couldn't become consul until 40 or 42, whether you're a plebeian or a patrician, okay? But he became consul at 35. After serving as consul, he fought the Mediterranean Sea pirates, made him very famous and well-liked. He formed, as I mentioned, the first triumvirate with Julius Caesar and Crassus. And the first triumvirate fell apart along with their relationship. I get confused when I'm writing. I'm not writing about something. So anyway, that kind of snuck in there. So the relationship, you know, at the very bottom, the more things change, the more they stay the same. You got people who are friends for a while, and then they're bitter enemies, then they kiss and make up, and they're friends. This happened. I mean, I can give you example after example after example of this happening in ancient Roman times, okay? The more things change, the more they stay the same. All right, so it fell apart because of these reasons. First of all, Pompey's wife and Caesar's only child, Julia, died giving birth to Pompey's and Julia's son. Okay, the child also died. Okay. Also, Crassus was killed by the Parthians, as I mentioned. Okay. Caesar tried to patch things up with Pompey by offering his grandniece, Octavia Minor, to Pompey in marriage. Okay, but Pompey refused. He ended up marrying Cornelia. This was the daughter of one of Caesar's enemies, Metellus Scipio, of the senatorial faction of the Optimates, okay, the traditional, the aristocratic class. Remember, Caesar was a populist, okay? There's a conflict here. So Pompey married the daughter of this sophisticated aristocratic guy, and it did not set things well between them, okay, even though Julius Caesar offered Octavia Minor to him. Pompey, then, as sole consul in Rome, now he wasn't sole consul, but he was the one in Rome. Julius Caesar was the other consul. Julius Caesar was out fighting in Britain, and Pompey back home was really trying to undermine him, okay? He refused to allow Caesar to run as consul in Abstentia or until he disbanded his armies, okay? So he's doing everything to really undermine Julius Caesar and really make Julius Caesar mad, okay? All of this, and I'm going through so much history, okay? But all of this caused Julius Caesar to cross the Rubicon River in northeastern Italy in 49 BC. The die is cast when he crossed the river and he marched on Rome. We have precedence, right? He marched on Rome. He wasn't the first guy to do it. It had been done before, 40, 50 years earlier. Okay. Pompey and much of the Senate fled Rome. When you remember this story, right? When Pompey fled to Egypt, we covered this under the Ptolemies. When he fled to Egypt, Ptolemy the 13th had him beheaded in front of his wife and kids and presented his head to Julius Caesar. And it made Julius Caesar really mad. You remember that story? He was mad because Pompey was his son-in-law. Pompey was a great Roman general. Pompey was a consul of Rome, and it really made Julius Caesar mad. And this set up the relationship between Caesar and the girl in the rug, Cleopatra, right? The girl in the rug. And that relationship caused a lot of things republic-wise, okay? And it caused a lot of problems later on when Antony and Cleopatra got together. We'll talk about that in just a minute. All right. Julius Caesar, his career. Very popular and successful general, served as consul 5 times, was a dictator a bunch of times. He set the stage to the Roman Empire by Octavian. His uncle was Gaius Marius, as we discussed, which put him on the wrong side of the prescriptions of Sulla. Caesar was captured by pirates at one point in his life who demanded 20 talents of silver in ransom, and Caesar said, that's not enough. I can kind of see someone like Trump saying something like that, right? That's not enough. Julius Caesar, that's not enough. You ought to demand 50. I'm worth a lot more than 20 talents of silver. You kidding me? $5 million? I'm worth at least $13 million. And they did. And I guess somebody paid it because he escaped. But he told the pirates, he said, you know what? I'm going to come back and I'm going to crucify every single one of you when I'm done. And he did. Came back and crucified every one of them. Hopefully he got his 50 talents. I mean, his talents back. His $13 million, 50 talents. Caesar began the cursus honorum as a military tribune, different from a tribune of the plebes, and became Pontifex Maximus, which is the highest office of the Roman state religion. He increased the size of the Senate from 600 to 900 and gave himself unprecedented powers to basically do what he wanted to do. He formed the first triumvirate, as I mentioned, with Pompey and Crassus. And because of Pompey, Caesar was ordered to disband his army and come home, which led to the civil war between them. Precedence, once again, was set already by Sulla and Marius, okay? Caesar and Pompey had their civil war that we talked about under the Ptolemies, okay? Pompey's murder precipitated a relationship between, as I mentioned, Caesar and Cleopatra, 7, okay? A couple of quotes from Julius Caesar, the die is cast when he crossed the Rubicon. And he was very pithy, very, very succinct. I came, I saw, I conquered. When he conquered Pontus in 47 BC. I like that guy. Very popular guy. His setup for assassination. According to Livius, a Roman historian, 3 key incidents led to his assassination. First of all, the Senate voted to grant Caesar a large number of honors. That's a good thing, right? A Senate delegation presented these honors at the Temple of Venus. He was expected to rise in acknowledgement, okay, but he remained seated, thus disregarding the authority of the Senate. Oh, so it begins. Incident 2. Some members of the crowd addressed Caesar as king. Oh dear. You remember the monarchy was overthrown very early on? We had Romulus and Remus and Pompilius and all the way through Tarquin the Proud. And Tarquin the Proud was so bad that they overthrew the monarchy and formed the Roman Republic. Okay? Then we get into the consuls and the Senate and all that kind of thing. Okay? Romans did not like kings. We're kind of that way, right? We're Americans. We didn't like kings either. That's why we had the Revolutionary War. Okay? But Romans did not like kings. So when people were saying Caesar is a king, ooh, that's not good. He replied, I am not Rex, but Caesar. No, that's okay. 2 tribunes ended up discovering a diadem placed on the head, a crown, placed on the head of Caesar's statue in the Roman Forum in January 44 BC. He stripped the tribunes of their office and Senate membership. Yeah, some stuff's brewing here. Incident number 3. Mark Antony at a gathering placed a diadem on Caesar's head and proclaimed, the people give you this through me. And the crowd said, crickets. You are putting a crown on a person, declaring him king. We don't like that. Caesar took it off and put it aside. Mark Antony picked it up again, put it on his head again. Silence. Just like this. We think, well, many people think that this was Caesar's testing the crowd. You've heard trial balloons before? This was Caesar's trial balloon to see how the Romans felt about a king. And the Romans would have nothing to do with it. Okay? There was a growing belief because of these incidents that Caesar intended to crown himself king of Rome. And the people would have nothing to do with it. Now, unbeknownst to the senators that killed him, Caesar was still a very popular person. They didn't want him as king, but he was still a very, very popular person. All right, so Julius Caesar, he was killed on March 15th, 44 BC by about 60 senators. He was very unpopular with the aristocrats and patricians, but very popular with the people. It was believed that killing him in the Senate would reinforce the idea that the conspirator was acting on behalf of the Roman people, not personal ambition. Caesar wasn't going to attend. His wife came up and said, you know, I had a dream. Calpurnia came up and said, I had a dream. Please don't go to the Senate today. And he said, all right, I'm not going. But then a guy came along, Brutus, personally visited Caesar and said, you need to go to the Senate. Mark Antony heard rumors about what was happening. He tried to get to Caesar, but he's headed off. And then his death happened in the Senate. Cimber seized Caesar's toga, to which Caesar exclaimed, why? This is violence. And then Casca striking the first blow to Caesar's neck. Longinus, Caesar's face, stabbed in his back, his thigh. Caesar tripped, fell on the stairs. He was stabbed 23 times, and he was 55 years old when he died. And Julius Caesar, the play by William Shakespeare, we hear that he said, you too, Brutus? Now, an actual historian, Suetonius, says that, you too, my son? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe he was silent. Maybe he said something we don't know for sure. But you too, my son?
Sounds like suicide.
Sounds like suicide?
Yeah. 23 stab wounds in the back.
Oh, yeah. I should have known there was something else coming there. Yes, suicide. Let me change all my notes here. Julius Caesar committed suicide. A new historical aspect. Okay. He was in the Senate house of Pompey, in the theater of Pompey, and fell dead at the base of Pompey's statue. Oh, kind of ironic that he and Pompey were pretty bitter enemies toward the end. His body lay there for quite a while until 3 slaves carried him home. The aftermath of his death. 2 days after his death, Mark Antony convened the Senate and brokered a compromise to prevent government instability. He said the conspirators would not face punishment, but all of Caesar's official acts would remain valid. Antony believed he was consul, right? Julius Caesar was the other consul. Julius Caesar was dead, so Antony believed that he was the de facto replacement for Caesar until he found out that Caesar had named a little runt guy named Octavian in his will as his heir. Oh, wow. 17-year-old runt Octavian, I don't know if he's a runt or not, but 17-year-old, Antony was this great general. He had conquered lands for Rome. He had done all kinds of things for Rome. But Caesar put Octavian in his will as his heir? What's going on? I'll talk about that in just a minute. Everyone underestimated everyone else. The assassins underestimated the people's love for Caesar, and his death caused another civil war. Antony greatly underestimated the young Octavian, 17 years old. And the second triumvirate, as I mentioned, was formed on November 27th, 43 BC. Between those three, the triumvirs went after the assassins, and they were very successful against Brutus and Cassius, 2 of the main ones at Philippi. And the Senate ended up deifying Caesar in 42 BC. That made Caesar a god. 5 years later, Octavian will be able to claim for himself the title, the Son of God, even though he was not a blood descendant of Caesar. Yeah, that's kind of a neat thing for Octavian. But Caesarion, now remember him? Caesarion was Julius Caesar's actual child through Cleopatra over in Egypt. Caesarion, Ptolemy the 15th, Caesarion was an actual child, a blood relative descendant of Julius Caesar. Well, Octavian couldn't have that, could he? So that didn't last very long when Octavian came on the scene. The Julian calendar, remember we talked about this at week 1? Yikes, that was a long, long time ago, 753 weeks ago, if I'm counting right. Julius Caesar transformed the existing calendar 12 months to 355 days, one to 12 months and 365 and a quarter days, okay? You inserted leap year, and you've heard this before, just a quick review. You inserted a leap year every 4 years, dispersed the extra 10 days throughout the year, and the year 46 became 445 days long because he had to kind of adjust things. After the Caesar died in 44 BC, the month of Quintilis was renamed to July, or Julius, in his honor. That was his birth month. Quint means 5, the 5th month of July, right? Oh no, it's the 7th month of July, because back in the day, Numa Pompilius had added January and February to the beginning of the calendar instead of the end of the calendar, so that shifted all the months. Their names were all wrong. December, the 10th month, was now December, the 12th month. That'll make sense. And that's Numa Pompilius' fault, the second king of Rome, okay, under the monarchy. Same thing happened in 8 BC with Augustus. August was named because of him. Sextilis, it was the month. The 6th month of August, again, that doesn't make sense, is now the 8th month. Note that both July and August have 31 days. We have to have our little ditty. 30 days has September, April, June, November, and the February has, who knows? That's the way I remember the ditty. Because August had to have the same number of days as July, right? You know, Octavian Augustus was just as good or maybe better than Julius Caesar. Okay. Of course, the Julian calendar has been superseded by the Gregorian calendar, which is kind of what we use today, but we use really atomic time today. And we talked about all that week 1. So we will pick up with Mark Antony next week, okay? And we'll finish up the Roman. Again, I'm spending more time on the Republic than I really wanted to, but that's okay. My emphasis really is over here on Judea, but we kind of look into the overall scheme of things when we look at the Roman Republic and Roman Empire, which encompass the Principate and the Dominate that we'll talk about next week, turns out. All right, well, thank y'all for being here. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. I'm trying to cover a lot today. I'm going to finish up the Republic, and we're going to cover the Empire, and we're going to finish with history today. I never get as much accomplished during the week as I'd like to. So if you're joining me today, this is part 2 of the Republic. If you're joining me on YouTube video, I've changed shirts and pants. We're going to cover one more today, Mark Antony, and we're going to cover half of Octavian, the Republic half of Octavian. Remember, he became the last leader of the Republic and then the first leader of the Empire. Okay, so we talked about Marius, important last week, and Sulla, because they set up for what was to come with the empire. They set up proscriptions. They were really all into proscriptions when they just went out and killed people and put their head on a spike, whatever. You know, it was good and great to do, okay? Marius changed the military to where the military started becoming more loyal to their commanders as opposed to loyal to the Senate, okay? So they set up a lot of things, dictatorships, for example. Sulla had a dictatorship for longer than 6 months, and that was like unprecedented. But Julius Caesar said, it's precedented now, I'll do dictatorship for more than 6 months. In fact, he became dictator for life about a month before he was killed. Okay? Very short dictatorship. So anyway, all this precedent was being set up with the late Republic, with these leaders of the late Republic. Marius, Sulla, Crassus, Julius Caesar. Okay? That all set the stage for what was to happen with the empire. Okay. All right. So, the last one of our 6, Mark Antony. Now, 2 of the 3 of the AIs I consulted did not have Mark Antony in there. And the reason is he was not really that important of a figure. You know, he's pretty famous, but he is important to me because he was stupid. It's more about what he did and didn't do, and the decisions he made, the bad decisions that he made, really did set up the beginning of the empire. It set up to where Mark Antony was kind of like the pariah of the Roman Empire, and Octavian could really put him aside and declare war on Cleopatra and Egypt, and hence Mark Antony. Okay, you remember the story? That was chapter 4. We're on chapter 11 now. Okay, so you know all that story already, right? I don't have to go back and tell that again. But anyway, Mark Antony, he was a good friend of Julius Caesar, but was in Julius Caesar's shadow for most of his career. He was given to extravagance. Caesar didn't like that. And we'll see later on that when Caesar died, he left in his will that who was to be his heir? Octavian, not Antony. Antony was co-consul of Julius Caesar. Antony thought, I'm going to be the guy. Julius Caesar, you know, he was all in with Julius Caesar. He hated to see him die, but he thought he was going to be the guy when Julius Caesar died. It wasn't the case. Julius Caesar set up Octavian in his will to be the main heir. Okay. Mark Antony was master of the horse during Caesar's second dictatorship. As I mentioned, he's more of a minor character. He was consul after the death of Caesar. Both of those were consul ordinarius. We talked about those a couple weeks ago. He proceeded to pursue Caesar's assassins, and then Dolabella later became Consul Suffectus. We talked about Consul Suffectus was a guy who came, out of sequence, okay? Dolabella became Consul Suffectus. Antony despised the fact that Julius Caesar had set Octavian up in his will because Octavian was just a little snotty-nosed kid, 17 years old. What good is he? But I think Julius Caesar saw in Octavian something he did not see in Antony. Antony was given to extravagance. Antony was given to his just wanting to go off and do his own thing. We saw that with Cleopatra for sure. Julius Caesar had no room to talk. He's the one who first had an affair with Cleopatra, and then Mark Antony did later. Okay, but I think Julius Caesar saw the character flaws of Antony, and he saw the character strengths of Octavian. That's why he set Octavian up in his will. Okay. Antony was stripped of his consulship in January 43 BC, and Octavian was given the power of imperium over Antony. We talked about imperium a couple weeks ago, the power of that. Octavian pursued Antony while Antony was pursuing Caesar's murderers. By the fall of 43 BC, they had made up, though, and were teamed up against the assassins of Caesar. Once again, they formed the second triumvirate with Marcus Aemilius, Lepidus, and Octavian. Antony did. Antony was to administer the eastern half of the kingdom. Octavian was to administer the western half of the kingdom. And Lepidus was to govern pieces of the kingdom, Spain, northern Africa. Okay. Now, it turns out that Lepidus wasn't around long of this triumvirate. He kind of tried to assert power. Octavian didn't like it and ended up pretty much putting him in his place and ended up banishing him at one point. So that left Antony and Octavian as the two-man triumvirate. It's a duumvirate. I just made that up. That's not a real thing. So don't quote me on that. Okay. So they were just a two-man triumvirate, Antony and Octavian. But Antony wasn't going to be around long, and we know the rest of that story, right? Because he went all in with Cleopatra. All right. So, his fall. In 41 BC, Antony summoned Cleopatra the 7th to see him. Okay? She made an impression. She always made a good first impression on the men that she went to meet. He was married to Fulvia. She died in 40 BC. He returned home to marry Octavia Minor, who was Octavian's sister, in a political alliance. Good move. Good move for Mark Antony. Bad move, he decided to divorce her in 33 BC and marry Cleopatra, the Egyptian queen. In addition to that, he decided to divide up Roman lands amongst their children. Oh, wow. Big mistake. Big mistake on Antony's part. So Helios took Armenia, Media, Parthia. Selene took a part. Ptolemy Philadelphus took a part. Cleopatra, the 7th, was declared as Queen of Queens, Queen of Egypt, Cyprus, okay? And Ptolemy Caesarion, the 15th Caesarion, the son of Julius Caesar, he was declared to be King of Kings, King of Egypt, and most importantly, the true heir of Julius Caesar. Oh dear. Octavian back in Rome didn't like that so much, right? We have Mark Antony over here declaring the true heir of Julius Caesar to be Ptolemy the 15th Caesarion. That made sense. Ptolemy the 15th was a true blood child, a true blood son of Julius Caesar. Oh, whoa, we can't have that. So Octavian embarked on a smear campaign against Antony. He accused him of leaving his wife, Octavia. He did. It was a true statement. And not only that, his wife, it was Octavian's sister. Oh, Antony, don't you know better than that? He accused him of abandoning Roman traditions. True. He went kind of all in on Egyptian traditions. He politicized the donations of Alexandria. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, to the Roman public. Also true. That's where he was giving away big chunks of Roman land to their children, to Egyptians. Rome worked hard for that land. And you're just going to give it away? Oh boy. Octavian went all in on discrediting him. And like I say, most of it was true. But the main thing was that Antony declared Caesarion the true heir of Caesar. Can't have that. Octavian convinced the Senate to declare war on Cleopatra in Egypt. The Roman populace was very weary of civil wars. Antony and Cleopatra were defeated in the great naval battle of Actium, Greece in 31 BC. And this loss secured Octavian as the main guy in the Roman Empire. Okay, remember Lepidus had already been banished as part of the triumvirate. We're down to the duumvirate, and then Antony was out, and we're left in the umvirate. I just made that up too. Okay, one guy, Octavian, still the Republic. Oh, but not for long. Okay. Now, it turns out several of his progeny later became Roman emperors. Caligula, emperor number 3, was his great-grandson. Claudius was his grandson. Nero, emperor number 5, was his great-great-grandson. We're going to cover those guys very quickly here in just a few minutes, I hope. Family tree of Mark Antony. As I mentioned, he was married to Fulvia. She died. He married Octavia Minor, Octavian's sister, and he divorced her, of course, and went all in with Cleopatra. Okay? As I mentioned, he divorced Octavia Minor, Octavian's sister. Bad move. They had 3 children, Cleopatra Selene, Helios, and Ptolemy Philadelphus. These are the donations of Alexandria. The yellow are lands controlled by Octavian, ruling from Rome. All the other colors are the stuff that Antony gave away. If you combine the blue, the green, the brown, the purple, and the red, that's all lands that Antony was supposed to control, but he basically divided all these up amongst their children and amongst Ptolemy XV Caesarion, the true heir of Julius Caesar. Big, bad move. The Romans didn't like that at all. Octavian had a great plan, and the Romans were all in with it. Yeah, the Romans were not happy with anything that Antony was doing, so Octavian really didn't have a hard time declaring war on Cleopatra and Egypt. He didn't declare war on Antony because the Romans were tired of civil war, but declared war on Cleopatra and Antony. And we know the rest of the story. We know that they were defeated and they ended up committing suicide. Antony stabbed himself thinking that Cleopatra was dead, and he finds out she's not dead. Oh dear. And he gets lifted up to her chamber because she wouldn't open the door, and he died, and then she committed suicide a little bit later, maybe with the snake and the asp or whatever, so we don't know for sure. Okay, because she was not keen on the idea of being in a Roman triumph back in Rome. All right. So, we're going to break Octavian into a couple of different pieces here. We're going to talk about the Republic part, and we're going to talk about the Empire part. Now, this is very similar to Simon back in the Maccabee-Hasmonean delineation. Remember, the line ran right through the middle of Simon? He became high priest, the civil leader and high priest forever. So we talk about he was a transition from the Maccabees to the Hasmoneans. Same thing here with Octavian. He was a transition from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire, or more specifically, the Roman Principate. We'll talk about that in just a second. So, he was very shrewd in how he handled things. He didn't want to get stabbed like Julius Caesar had done. I don't blame him. That doesn't sound fun at all, okay? He was very shrewd. He ended up doing the same things that Julius Caesar did, except a lot more, but everybody was okay with it. Yeah, we're good. Because he was very shrewd in how he handled. This is what he did. He preserved the Senate, assemblies, and magistracies. The cursus honorum remained in place. People could still be elected for office, and they would rise up to the cursus honorum we talked about a couple of weeks ago. He courted and regularly consulted the Senate, okay, making it appear as if they retained authority. They really didn't. The Senate had control over senatorial provinces, and they continued to play a role in legislation and administration. He adopted, through the approval of the Senate, the modest title of princeps, first citizen, not dictator, not emperor. We call him the first emperor, but he was never called that. He was always first citizen. And later on, the Senate bestowed on him the title of Augustus, revered, or the illustrious one, a religious kind of title, not emperor, not dictator like Julius Caesar had been, but more of a religious kind of thing. First citizen and a religious title. What's wrong with that? Nothing. He's a good guy. He really was, I think, a pretty good guy. Okay. Now, the Principate, which is what Octavian formed, was the first part of the Roman Empire. This lasted through 284 AD, when Diocletian just outright said, we're not going to even play anymore. The Principate was where they, starting with Octavian, he tried to maintain the appearance of the Republic. He kept the Senate in place. He kept the magistracies in place. He kept the cursus honorum, all these things, okay? That's the Principate. The Dominant happened in 284, where the emperors just threw all it out and said, we're not going to even play anymore. We don't care about the Senate. We don't care about pretending anymore. So the Empire was Principate Dominant, okay? The delineation point being 284 AD. Octavian accepted powers reluctantly and made a public show of returning his power to the Senate. The Senate then reluctantly granted him control over key provinces and their armies. We talked about imperial versus senatorial provinces a couple of weeks ago. He justified his power through precedent. After all, Pompey had been given special commands during his time. Okay, dictatorships had been granted to Caesar, Sulla, and others, lots of others. Okay, so all this was justified through precedent, and that was very important to keep up the appearances of it being a republic. It was not. It was becoming an empire. He emphasized restoration of ancient morality, modesty, and religious observance. A preserver. He was a preserver of Rome's values. He undertook public works and donated to the public treasury. He rebuilt temples, revived religious festivals, restored priesthoods, built public facilities like the Forum of Augustus, framed as a gift to the Roman people. He provided grain and entertainment. The first guy, the bread and circuses guy, Octavian was the bread and circuses guy. He lived rather modestly, dressed modestly. He avoided over displays of autocracy. Smart guy. Really, really smart guy. In 27 BC, he famously offered to resign his power to the Senate. He said, I'll give up on my power. And the Senate said, no, please stay, please stay. And they bestowed upon him the title of Augustus in 27 BC. And this is the delineation point, 27 BC, when we go from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire. Okay. Behind the scenes, he vetted candidates for the Senate, even though they were still chosen by election, but he made sure they were good candidates before they were even allowed to run. Resettlements of the Senate, he accumulated powers of consul, tribune of the plebes, censor, and proconsul. Standard Roman Republic offices, right? Except he controlled all of them all at once for life. Now, he didn't do it for life. There was just a lot of little short terms. I'm going to be a tribune of the plebe for the year, and then, oh, by the way, I'll be a tribune of the plebe again for next year. And then the next year, the Senate gives me, oh, well, I'll be tribune of the plebes again. Okay, I'll do that. Okay. So he kept up the appearance of the public all the way through his death at the first part of the Roman Empire. He quietly concentrated power in his own hands, transforming the republic into a monarchy in all but name. He accumulated multiple titles: imperator, supreme military commander. What's wrong with that? That's okay. Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest. What's wrong with that? That's an okay title. It's not dictator. It's not emperor. Okay. And he established the imperial cult. The Senate deified Julius Caesar after he died, and they also deified Octavian to give a sense of unity and loyalty to the emperor as a divine figure. This caused problems later for Christians, okay? Now the Romans, we're going to talk a lot about Roman gods later on in chapter 15, I think it is. And all the things of Rome, the Christians had to deal with, okay? So the Romans had a god for everything, and they would conquer people and they would bring their gods in. So they just kept adding gods, to their religion, okay? This pantheon of religion that the Romans had. The Jews and the Christians believed in one God. But if your emperor is a god and you're not bowing down to your emperor, what does that do? If you're a Christian, that makes you in big trouble, right? And we see Christians get in big trouble, particularly starting with Nero a little bit later on. We'll talk about that in just a second. Again, we'll talk about that in a lot of detail in chapter 15. So this right here is the top part of a giant messy chart called the Julio-Claudian family tree. Okay, Julio-Claudian. Julio comes from Julius Caesar. Claudian comes from Tiberius, who was of the Claudian family. Okay, these two families created this family tree from which 5 different emperors, Julius Caesar, and then 5 different emperors were born. Okay, we'll talk about those 5 as we go along. All right, so Julius Caesar, he had this affair with Cleopatra, and they had the son Caesarion. Notice the difference in lines here in my chart. Now, I don't have the key for this chart is way down here off the chart. We're going to talk about the lower 2/3 of this here in a minute, I think. But the key says that if a single line is a son, a double line is an adopted son. Okay? Octavian became the adopted son of Julius Caesar. And that set up some pretty big precedents, as we'll see a little bit later on. In fact, I'll jump ahead a little bit. You see all these lines of adoption here. Many, many adoptions later on in the empire. Okay? The only non-adopted son of the first 5 emperors was Claudius. Everyone else was adopted. Isn't that kind of weird? So they had actual sons, but they didn't make it sometimes. We'll talk about some of those details later. All right. Next up, Pompey. Part of the first triumvirate. Caesar tried to keep the triumvirate together. Julia, Caesar's daughter, died giving birth to their child, to Pompey's child. So they were out of the picture. The child and the mom both died. Okay. Crassus, who was part of the first triumvirate also, ended up getting killed in Parthia. He's the guy that had gold poured down his throat. Remember we talked about that last week. Okay. Bummer way to go. Maybe they did it posthumously. We don't know. Okay, Pompey ended up marrying Caesar's a daughter of one of Caesar's enemies. Oh dear! And the triumvirate fell apart. And not only did the triumvirate fall apart, we go into a Roman civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey. We've talked about that in some detail as we've gone along also. All right. Next up, Octavian Minor. Julius Caesar, when Julia died, offered his great niece to Pompey in marriage. And Pompey said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to marry the daughter of your enemy instead. All right. So Mark Antony ended up marrying Octavian Minor, Octavian's sister, a little bit later on in history. Okay, he's still Octavian's sister, but because he ended up divorcing her and going with Cleopatra, that started that second civil war, really a war with Egypt officially, but really a second civil war between Octavian and Antony. So you see these family relationships that are kind of forming here in the top part of this chart. Again, the line from Republic to Empire goes straight through Augustus. That's the Roman Republic. Thank y'all for being here.